I called out my 23 male brother for dating a 17-year-old, letting her drink alcohol and smoke weed in my parents' house. Now my parents are cutting me out of holidays and treating me like the villain for setting a boundary. I'm a 26-year-old woman, the second youngest of 4 siblings. My siblings are 33 male, 32 female, and 23 male. I'm currently in a doctorate program, working toward a career focused on supporting children who grew up in households affected by substance use disorders or who had family members struggling with addiction. Because of my education and training, I tend to be very attuned to family dynamics, trauma histories, and situations that can quietly become unhealthy even when everyone involved has good intentions. My youngest brother, who is 23, entered a new relationship extremely quickly. He broke up with his previous girlfriend, and literally 1 week later, in July 2025, he started dating someone new. That alone raised a small internal red flag for me, but I didn't say anything at the time. He's an adult, and rebounds happen. I figured it wasn't my place to comment unless something more concerning emerged. I met this new girlfriend for the first time that same week at a small get-together at my parents' house. I made an effort to sit down with her one-on-one to get to know her, because that's just how I am. I don't like making assumptions about people, and I wanted to give her a fair chance. She was drinking a cocktail and smoking weed during the gathering, which I noticed, but didn't immediately judge. People unwind in different ways, and it wasn't my house or my rules. As we talked, she shared quite a bit very quickly. She told me that she grew up in an abusive household and that, from a young age, she had taken on a caretaker role for her younger siblings. She talked about having to grow up fast, being exposed to a lot of adult situations early, and not really having a stable or safe home environment. From a professional and personal standpoint, that kind of disclosure stood out to me. It's a lot of trauma to carry, especially to share with someone you've just met. Because of what she was describing, and because she physically looked quite young to me, I eventually asked her how old she was. I tried to phrase it casually, but I was genuinely curious. She told me she was 21. That explained some things, but it also made the situation feel heavier. Going through that level of abuse and responsibility at such a young age is significant, and it often impacts how people attach to relationships and seek stability. Later that same week, I was told something that really caught me off guard. My brother and my parents informed me that she was moving into my parents' house immediately, specifically into my old bedroom. My youngest brother still lives at home, and apparently this decision had already been made, without much discussion. I was surprised by how fast everything was moving, considering they had just started dating days earlier. They explained to me that her lease had ended at an apartment she previously shared with an abusive ex. According to them, she couldn't move back in with either her mother or her father because of the abuse she had experienced in those homes as well. Essentially, she had nowhere else to go. Because of that, my parents agreed to let her move in right away so she could live with my brother at their house. I understood the compassion behind the decision. I really did. No one wants to see a young woman with a traumatic background end up homeless or forced back into an abusive situation. At the same time, I couldn't shake how fast and intense everything felt. A brand new relationship, a major trauma history, no independent housing, and immediate cohabitation in my parents' home, all within the span of a week. From both a family systems perspective and a clinical one, it felt like a lot of pressure placed on a very new relationship and on my family as a whole. Later that same month, I hosted a game night at my house. I invited a few people I'm close to, my cousins, my younger brother, and 2 other cousins who are 26M and 24M. I wanted it to be relaxed and social, nothing wild. I provided wine, other drinks, and snacks. My cousins, my brother, and my brother's girlfriend brought weed and smoked together. I don't use marijuana products at all because of my schooling and the professional standards I'm held to, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, and overall the night felt normal and friendly. The atmosphere was good, and people were talking and laughing. Throughout the evening, everyone got to know my brother's girlfriend a little better. She talked easily, shared stories, and generally blended in with the group. At no point did anything feel overtly inappropriate to me during the game night itself, because I was still operating under the belief that she was 21, as she had told me previously at my parents' house. That assumption framed how I understood the entire evening. The next day, my brother came back to my house to pick something up he had left behind. While he was loading it into his car, his girlfriend stayed behind and started chatting with me casually. In a very offhand way, she began talking about how they were looking for apartments together. She mentioned that they were aiming for something in October. That immediately caught my attention. Given how new their relationship was, it already felt fast, but I didn't jump to conclusions. Instead, I asked her why October specifically. Her response completely blindsided me. She said, very casually, that she turns 18 at the beginning of October, so she would be able to sign a lease then. I remember stopping her mid-sentence. I felt my entire body freeze. I looked at her and said, I thought you said you were 21? There was a pause that felt much longer than it probably was. Her eyes widened, and then she said, Oh, I'm sorry. I just tell that to parents because I know they get uncomfortable when there's drinks involved. I didn't know what to say. I genuinely felt speechless. My brain was trying to catch up with what she had just admitted. A 17-year-old had been in my home the night before, drinking alcohol and smoking weed, and I had unknowingly provided alcohol in that environment under the assumption that everyone present was of legal age. I said goodbye to my brother and to her, trying to keep my composure, and then I went back inside. As soon as the door closed, everything started racing through my head. Where I live, it is illegal for anyone under 21 to possess or consume alcohol. It is also illegal for anyone over 21 to provide alcohol to a minor, even indirectly. In my mind, that meant that I could potentially be held legally responsible for what had happened, despite not knowing her real age. Beyond the legal implications, there were serious professional implications for me as well. Given my field of study and the population I work with, any involvement in something like delinquency of a minor could be devastating to my future career. Feeling completely unsettled and unsure whether I was overreacting, I called my parents and my cousins. I needed to know if I was being unreasonable or if this situation was as alarming as it felt to me. I explained exactly what had happened and what she had told me. My cousins immediately said they were extremely uncomfortable and agreed that the situation was not okay. My parents were clearly shocked and upset, and they told me they would talk to my brother about it. Hearing their reactions validated that I wasn't imagining the seriousness of the situation, but it didn't make me feel any less disturbed. At the end of July, my parents hosted a barbecue at their house and invited me and my cousins. I went, even though I was already feeling uneasy about the situation and hadn't yet figured out how or when to address it. From the moment I arrived, my discomfort only grew. My brother and his girlfriend were completely wrapped up in each other the entire time, constantly kissing, hugging, leaning on one another, whispering, using baby talk. It wasn't just normal affection. It felt excessive and performative, especially given the context. What made it far worse was what was happening around them. My parents and my brother were actively giving her cocktails, beer, and letting her use a bong. All of this was happening in plain sight, with multiple adults present, treating this 17-year-old like just another grown friend at a party. I felt sick watching it. Every part of my training, my ethics, and my common sense was screaming that this looked bad, legally, morally, and socially. I was hyper-aware of how this would look to anyone outside the family, and I couldn't understand how no one else seemed to care. I spent most of that barbecue trying to keep my distance, making excuses to step away, and feeling increasingly tense. Eventually, I just left. I didn't say anything in the moment because I knew I wasn't in a headspace to speak calmly, and I didn't want to explode in front of everyone. I told myself I would talk to my brother later, once I had time to gather my thoughts and figure out how to approach it without making things worse. About a week later, after going over everything in my head again and again, I called my brother. I tried to be as composed as possible. I told him that I was concerned about the situation, about how it looked, and about how uncomfortable it made me. I told him that from the outside, it felt creepy and alarming that he had moved a minor into his home, into our parents' home, where she was cooking, cleaning, and sleeping with him, all while she had been on the verge of being homeless. I also brought up how quickly the relationship had progressed and how much pressure and imbalance there seemed to be, given her age and circumstances. He immediately blew up. He started yelling, telling me I was heartless and judgmental. He went on about how he'd been through terrible relationships before, how this was the first time he felt genuinely cared for, and how his girlfriend treated him so well. He emphasized how much she helped around the house, how supportive she was, how happy he finally felt. I listened, trying to stay calm, but I couldn't ignore the power dynamic he was describing. I said something that I knew would hurt but felt honest. Yeah, I'd be doing all that too if it meant not being homeless. That was the moment everything completely fell apart. He started crying, telling me he couldn't believe his own sister would judge him like this, that no one ever likes him, that everyone is always against him. He sounded devastated, and that hurt, because I never wanted to be someone who caused him pain. I tried to clarify myself. I told him that I do support him, that I love him, and that I genuinely want the best for him. I told him that my concern wasn't about attacking him as a person, but about the situation itself. I said that I wanted him in my life, but that I couldn't be around this relationship, especially when nearly every family gathering involves alcohol or weed being given to his underage girlfriend. I told him I wasn't trying to control him, but I had to set my own boundaries. He didn't respond to that. He hung up on me. I tried to go on with my day, but I was emotionally wrecked. A few hours later, my parents called me, and they were furious. They immediately started yelling at me, accusing me of calling my brother a pedophile, even though I never used that word. They told me I was ostracizing him from the family, and they blamed me for the fact that my cousins had also expressed that they were uncomfortable being around him and his girlfriend. Apparently, my cousin's discomfort had come up separately, but it was all being pinned on me. They screamed at me about how happy he is now, how he actually gets out of bed since she moved in, how she's been so good for him. They tried to justify the relationship by saying she'll be 18 soon, as if that erased everything that had already happened. At one point, they even said, "Your grandmother got married at 14, as if that made this acceptable. I told them flatly that our grandmother was a victim, not an example to follow. The conversation spiraled further. My mom started crying, saying that she's done everything to keep this family together, and that now my own daughter is excluding us. Hearing that crushed me. As the next few months went by, I genuinely tried to repair things with my parents while still maintaining distance from my brother and his girlfriend. I didn't want to completely cut anyone off, and I didn't want to be seen as someone who was holding a grudge or punishing the family. I made an effort. I reached out, invited my parents to different things, suggested dinners, casual get-togethers, and opportunities to just spend time together without tension. On the few occasions we did see each other, things were polite but strained, like everyone was carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. What hurt, though, was noticing the contrast. They often told me they were busy or unavailable, but I'd then see photos on Facebook of them out at events around town with my brother and his girlfriend, festivals, dinners, little outings. Seeing those posts stung more than I expected. It wasn't just about missing events. It was the realization that effort was being made elsewhere, just not with me. Then Thanksgiving came around, and that's when it really started to sink in. I found out, again, not from my parents directly, but through other family and social media, that they weren't coming to my grandparents' house like we normally do every year. Instead, they decided to host their own Thanksgiving at their house. What made it even more disturbing was learning that they had invited my brother's girlfriend's grandfather, the same grandfather she had told us abused her and was the reason she had nowhere else to go and ended up moving in with my parents in the first place. I couldn't wrap my head around that. It felt surreal and deeply unsettling, like all logic and concern had completely gone out the window in the name of keeping the peace. Christmas was the final blow. My parents didn't tell me they were taking a trip to visit my other grandparents for the holiday. I didn't hear it from them at all. Once again, I found out through Facebook. Seeing those posts made something drop in my chest. These are major family holidays, times that, growing up, were always about being together. And now, without any direct conversation, I was just excluded. What hurts the most is the feeling that my parents are choosing my brother and his girlfriend over me. It feels like I'm being sidelined because I confronted something that made me uncomfortable and set a boundary I felt I needed to set. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't try to force anyone to do anything. Throughout my life, I've genuinely tried to be a good child. I never got expelled. I never did drugs. I've never been arrested or gone to prison. Something I can't say about my older siblings, both of whom are currently incarcerated for drug-related offenses. I finished college. I got into a competitive doctorate program. I volunteer. I help my grandparents with their healthcare appointments and daily needs. I go to therapy. Now, I find myself questioning everything. I don't know if I'm blowing this out of proportion. I don't know if I'm being conceited, controlling, or overly rigid. My brother's girlfriend is 18 now, legally an adult, but that doesn't erase how the relationship started, how quickly she was moved into my parents' home, or how much alcohol and weed were involved while she was still a minor. I keep asking myself if I'm actually the one in the wrong here. Am I being unreasonable for holding on to this discomfort? Am I wrong for setting boundaries and sticking to them, even when it costs me closeness with my family? Or am I justified in feeling hurt and pushed aside for refusing to pretend that something felt normal when it didn't? At this point, I honestly don't know anymore. Am I the whole?